Good morning. Welcome into Unpaid Interns. It is Friday, December 4th, and it is almost game day again for Indiana football tomorrow. A huge top 20 matchup as the Indiana Hoosiers take on the Wisconsin Badgers from Madison. We have another great guest that covers IU football joining us today to help break it down. Stefan Krajisnik. That last name's tough.
Yeah,
Did I
yeah,
get it
you
right?
did well.
I
You
got it
did
right.
well. You
All
did.
right,
You did.
I'm not going to even try it again. Anyway, Stefan, an IU athletics reporter for the IndyStar, joins us this morning. And obviously, it's been a very eventful last week for IU football with the injury to Michael Penix. Jack Tuttle now coming in as IU starting quarterback. What was your reaction to the change? How do you feel this is going to affect the team both on Saturday and just going forward for the rest of the season?
Right. I think I kind of, initially the same way that everyone did was just really confused about what had happened to Michael Penix. I mean, watching all the replays, it's still hard to tell from the replays exactly what happened. And then obviously now we know that it's a torn ACL, the same ACL he tore his freshman year. So obviously that that's heartbreaking for Mike and for the football team. But I think you've seen them react pretty well. With Jack Tuttle coming in, I think they're embracing what he can be. I mean, there's no denying what he was coming out of high school. And the opportunity that he has now with Indiana to show his abilities. I think it's exciting for Indiana. I mean, it's another challenge, and I think if they make the most of it, it can be really intriguing to see what happens. Not only this Saturday, but moving forward, with the rest of the season, a season that I think Indiana still has a lot of high hopes for. So that was my initial reaction to seeing Mike go down. I mean, we saw last season. Obviously, we knew what Peyton Ramsey could bring in. Now we get to see what Jack Tuttle does, and I think it'll be fun to see what can happen this weekend.
The Hoosiers ranked number 12 in the country by the College Football Playoff Committee. Some IU fans maybe not super happy with that ranking. 2-loss Georgia's in front of them, 2-loss Oklahoma, and 2-loss Iowa State, as well as a Miami team, which has struggled at times this season with one loss. Do you feel like IU is being disrespected a little bit by the committee? And especially when we're looking at New Year's Six bowl games, how important is that where they're ranked by the College Football Playoff Committee?
Yeah, it's just funny to think about like Indiana football fans not being happy with like the number 12 ranking this late into the season. But I mean, there's a fair argument to be made. I don't know. I don't know if the committee necessarily is disrespecting Indiana. I think they're more so just really overhyping Georgia and Iowa State in particular. I mean, yeah, you mentioned Oklahoma too. I guess you could add them to that list. To have them in front of Indiana is a little bit confusing to me. I just simply don't think Georgia right now is a top 10, top 9 football team in the nation. I don't think Iowa State is either. So when I looked at those rankings, I didn't so much focus on the fact that Indiana was number 12. I personally feel like Indiana is probably in that range. I don't think they're necessarily a top 10 team quite yet, but in that 10 to 15 range, I think is fair. It's just some of these teams that they're putting in front. I mean, if I was BYU, I'd be irate with where I'm at, maybe even more than Indiana is right now. So yeah, the rankings are a little confusing to me. I mean, you could even go past Indiana. I think Iowa came in at number 17. They're like the two-loss Iowa team, and it's like, oh, I mean, if a one-loss Indiana team with their only loss being a 7-point loss to Ohio State, how are they 12? And this Iowa team that lost to someone like Purdue is at number 17. I mean, that just doesn't make sense to me. So it's not even so much where Indiana sits. There's just some parts of the college football playoff committee where I wish we could have a camera in the room to just see what's the conversation we're having.
I guess why I don't want to tread too much on the College Football Playoff Committee and their decisions, but one more thought I guess I have, and you look at those rankings and you kind of think of brand names, and especially with Georgia and Oklahoma, two college football powerhouses, both played in the college football playoff. How much is that a factor, and how much does that just hurt Indiana that the playoff committee has never ranked them? Same to BYU, who you mentioned, and they're just not really used to seeing there. And also, they don't make a lot of money. They don't have national fan bases.
Right. I mean, I don't want to put words in people's mouths because I'm, like I mentioned, those conversations are behind closed doors. But I mean, it has to play some kind of role. I mean, to just see someone like a Georgia or an Iowa State or an Oklahoma in there, I think it does play a part in what the committee is doing. And I think when we talk about So let's just use Georgia as an example. When you think of Georgia, you think of a top 10 football team, and then you say, okay, well, their only losses are to this team. I think it's Florida and Alabama are what their only losses are. And then you look at that, you're like, okay, well, it's Georgia and they lost to good teams, but I just that's just not how it works. I mean, you can't just be looking at name brand to help you with that selection. So I do think it hurts Indiana not having that national recognition. I think that's something that Tom Allen's trying to build, and maybe in a couple of years, Indiana can be considered one of those stronger teams that just kind of gets in from name brand, which is kind of hard to imagine, but. Yeah, no, it definitely hurts, and it hurts Indiana in the aspect that after that Ohio State game, I think Indiana fans were so encouraged with the performance that they saw, and I think they should be. That was a really good performance by Indiana. And then you listen to the national broadcast, and they're saying, oh, is Ohio State not as good as we thought? And right away, that's diminishing what Indiana does, is because now instead of saying that, oh, Indiana played really well against Ohio State, you're saying that Ohio State's actually the team that's maybe not as good as we thought. I mean, I think they're number 4 in the rankings right now. I think they're a team that probably should be 2 or 3. Granted they haven't played as many games, but it is disheartening, I guess, for Indiana fans to have everyone just downplay the competition at this point, instead of having Indiana belong where they probably should be in the rankings.
You just mentioned Georgia, and I was thinking about the eye test where they talk about being important this year, and that's just not an offense that, if you watch, is impressive at all. They've played with 3 different quarterbacks. So enough about the college football playoff, though. I want to talk more about tomorrow's game. And what do you just see as the importance for the game tomorrow? Top 20 matchup, IU second of the season, in terms of brand significance and in terms of significance going forward for the rest of the season, in terms of where IU does go and play in a bowl game, and just how the rest of the season is viewed when we zoom out from a big picture lens.
Yeah, I think the 2 biggest things for Indiana in that game is going to be stopping Wisconsin's rushing attack. I mean, that's what the Wisconsin brand is. And I think in that Michigan game, they had 4 or 5 guys with 60+ running yards. I mean, they're a deep running back room. And I think that's where we saw Indiana struggle the most against Ohio State. When Ohio State went on that big run, it was because they weren't able to stop Ohio State's run. So that's where the defense is going to really have to step up that front 7 and controlling the run a little bit, with the Wisconsin team. And then you look at Graham Mertz, and I think this is what Indiana defense thrives off of, is creating takeaways, right? So that's what they're going to have to do against Mertz, and I think they can. I mean, we saw him against Northwestern. He's very human, and you can get interceptions and force takeaways against that offense. It's an offense that maybe, in their big games against Illinois and Michigan, where they're putting up 40+ points, I think that showed a lot more about those opponents' defenses, because when they face someone like Northwestern, I mean, Northwestern just shut them down. And I think Indiana has an even better defense than Northwestern. Just in terms of the opportunities that they create off of those takeaways and what they're able to do schematically and throwing off the quarterback. I think that's where Indiana thrives, and I think this is an offense that I think Indiana's defense can really take advantage of. I know the storyline going into the game is Jack Tuttle and how will Indiana's offense rebound without Michael Penix, but I'm very intrigued to see what this Indiana defense can do against that Wisconsin offense, an offense that I don't think is that great. If Indiana can slow down the run, they're going to get their takeaways, and that's where I think Indiana really has the edge in this game, and that's where I think the Hoosiers can really take advantage.
Let's talk a little bit more about Jack Tuttle. Is going to make his first D1 start ever. Not a lot of college experience. What does he need to do tomorrow for Indiana to have success?
Yeah, I think he just needs to be a game manager. The defense is going to present those opportunities that they've been all season. I mean, Indiana, so many times they get good field position off of an interception or something, where you don't have to do too much in particular. And I don't think Jack Tuttle needs to go out there and sling it for 500 yards like we saw Penix do against Ohio State. I think Jack Tuttle just needs to play a very controlled game. We saw last week what Indiana can do in terms of the run game with Tim Baldwin and Stevie Scott, and we'll see what if Samson James is available to play this weekend, David Ellis as well. If Indiana can have the running game that it had last week, and Jack Tuttle is playing well and not making mistakes, as long as he's not throwing interceptions, taking unopportunistic sacks, just making a smart play. This is an Indiana offense that can thrive. I mean, it's a deep running back room like we saw last week. You got receivers, Wap, Ty Freifogel that are really effective. You just got to get the ball to them, and they're going to make plays. Jack Tuttle, control what you're doing. Don't make mistakes. The defense is going to give you opportunities. He doesn't need to be Tom Brady out there. I think what's good is that whatever the fans may be saying and maybe overreacting about the fact that the Penix is out again for the rest of the season. I think within that Indiana locker room and what they've been doing at practices, I think they're very confident in what Jack can do. And he's been here for a couple of years now. I mean, he knows the system just as well as anyone. I mean, he's been in that quarterback room for 2 years now with Nick Sheridan. So I think it doesn't need to be too much from Jack, and that's what people are probably going to talk about the most, and rightfully so. I mean, the quarterback is a quarterback, and that's the most important position in the game. But if Indiana's defense does what it does, Indiana doesn't need that much out of Jack Tuttle this weekend.
You briefly mentioned the run game had by far their best day of the season last weekend against Maryland, 234 yards on the ground. Tim Baldwin got his first significant action rush for over 100 yards. How effective can they be? A much stouter defensive front than Maryland this week with Wisconsin. And it actually ranked the best defense in the Big Ten. Basically every category. Is that something you see maybe they can get going and help free up Tuttle a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's something that they're going to have to do to free up Tuttle. I think if you're Indiana, you don't want to get to a point where you're relying on Jack to be passing it, as much as we've seen Mike in some stretches. I think about that Penn State game, the Ohio State game, where Penix is just having to sling it to get Indiana into the game. And I think what was most promising from that Maryland game was I think that you had someone outside of Stevie Scott really step up, and I think Tim Baldwin's. I mean, he looks like he's really good. We have really one game just to base it off of, but considering how highly Tom Allen has spoke about him the past couple months, I think it was encouraging to see him give the performance that he gave against Maryland. If Tim Baldwin and depending on what's up with Samson James, if he's going to play, and David Ellis can provide it. I mean, Stevie Scott's going to go out and he's going to get you your numbers, and if you get in the red zone, he's going to go get you your touchdowns. If Indiana can get some depth and really kind of wear down that Wisconsin defense, that's where I think they want to be. And I think that's where Jack Tuttle could thrive is if they're leaning so much on stopping the run, now you can get some play action into the mix, get the passing game going when you see the opportunity present itself. And those opportunities are going to create themselves off of that run game. It'll be interesting because I know how well that run game played against Maryland. There's been stretches like we saw in Ohio State where they've been really bad with the run and can't establish a run game whatsoever. So it's going to depend on what offensive line for Indiana shows up and what running back room shows up, if it's going to be that one that we saw against Maryland or the one we saw against Ohio State. I think they're going to need that. Maybe not the Maryland level. I don't think you need 200 plus rushing yards, but you definitely got to provide something, and you can't have something like what happened in that Ohio State game. So offensive line, running game, they're going to need to show up for Indiana. Offensive line is going to need to show up to protect Tuttle as well. I don't think every quarterback in the nation is as good under pressure as Mike Penix is, which I think just says more about Mike Penix. But yeah, those units are going to need to step up if Indiana wants to win this game.
This Wisconsin team is a little bit hard to figure out. They played the fewest games of anyone in the Big Ten, just 3 games played in a very herky-jerky season due to multiple COVID-19 cancellations. They had an outbreak for 2 weeks after their game against Minnesota canceled last week due to COVID-19 issues at Minnesota. What do you feel we know about this Wisconsin team? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses?
Yeah, I feel like we don't know very much, and it kind of feels like last week's Maryland game all over again because you didn't have that much film on Maryland going in. I think what we do know is they're very true to the Wisconsin brand that they've established. Still this season. I mean, the running game, offensive line are very potent, and it's going to present a lot of difficulties for Indiana's front seven to try to slow that down. That's what we know. In terms of weaknesses, I think we didn't see any weaknesses until the Northwestern game, and maybe we didn't realize how bad Illinois and Michigan were when they played Wisconsin initially. So maybe Wisconsin looked a lot better than we thought they actually are. The Northwestern game exposed a lot. I think exposed that, I don't think Graham Mertz is that great of a quarterback. I think, he's a good quarterback, and I think when Wisconsin has that rushing attack going, I think that Graham is, all they need. They don't need a Justin Fields or Mike Penix out there. But in terms of weaknesses, I think that offense turns the ball over, and I think Graham Mertz, can be throwing interceptions when you throw a scheme at him like Northwestern did. I think, like you mentioned, there's not much film, but there's that film of that Northwestern game of what that defense was able to do to really throw off the Wisconsin offense. And I think that's where Indiana's defense thrives. And I think that's going to be the problem for Wisconsin most in this game is the way their offense plays matches up pretty well with what Indiana's defense can do in terms of creating takeaways and what they seek to do. We saw Tom Allen last week talk about that this defense isn't just opportunistic, that these interceptions are happening because of these schemes and because of the ability that Indiana's secondary has. He said, let the quarterbacks just look at the tape. I think if Graham Mertz is looking at the tape, I don't think he's too thrilled with what's coming his way this weekend. So that's the weakness that Indiana has exposed. Is that ability to turn the ball over that Wisconsin's offense has. Indiana's defense needs to step up there. That's where this game, I think, matters the most for this Indiana team. So their strength, stop the run. Their weakness, they turn the ball over. We'll see how that matches up with this defense.
On the other side of the field, Wisconsin's defense, I mentioned it earlier, basically ranks first in the Big Ten across the board. Right. Obviously, small sample size with just 3 games. But even against Northwestern, just 17 points allowed. That was the most points they'd given up all season, and not at all helped by their offense, which turned the ball over 5 times. Is there anything that this IU team can exploit from this Wisconsin defense, or are they just going to have to hope to try to get some drives and some points together?
Right. It's a really tough defense you're going to have to face, and I think what's most important about establishing that run game is I think that'll open your play action game a lot, and I think that's where this defense can really be exposed. Is if you're able to start drawing them in, maybe take a couple shots downfield, it could end up making those couple big explosive plays like we saw against Ohio State. Could end up being a difference in terms of putting yourself back in the game or being out of the game. It is a tough defense, and that Northwestern game is a really good example. I mean, that Northwestern offense is all right, and Peyton Ramsey's a pretty good quarterback, and to hold them to 17 points is a pretty impressive performance. But you got to get them uncomfortable. You got to have them on their heels and unsure of what's coming. If you end up being too one-dimensional, whether it's only running it or whether that running game's not going and now you're only passing it, you can't have Wisconsin predicting what you're going to do. They're too good of a defense to also have them know what's coming. That's where Indiana needs to establish that run game, get the play action game going. If Indiana can do that, establish the run early and open up that play action passing game for Tuttle and make him a little more comfortable, I think that's where this Wisconsin defense can be exposed. And I think you could say that the other way. I mean, if Wisconsin can get the running game going and establish, the play action, I think that's where you get Indiana's defense on their heels. So I think it's very, very similar for both teams in terms of, what they're going to want to do offensively to throw this defense off. So it'll be really interesting to see. I think, at least at the start of the game, we're going to see both teams running it a lot, I think, trying to establish that run game. And if they're able to, we're going to see those play action games start opening up. I'm very interested to see, which defense can create those takeaways or get the stops that they need early in the game, because I think both offenses are going to be coming out with a very, very similar idea.
Last season, Michael Penix went down in the Northwestern game. It was not a great finish to the Indiana season with Peyton Ramsey. They lost 3 of their final 4 games to finish the season. Can that be different this year in part to the kind of change of mentality I guess we've seen? And I guess I'm asking how important is that LEO mentality we hear about from Tom Allen, and just kind of the ability by this team that we've seen to not give up in the Penn State game, in the Ohio State game. And it seems like a different Indiana team than maybe in past years if their starting quarterback had gone down.
Right. I mean, it's really important. I mean, it's funny because so many, from when the time Tom Allen took over and LEO, started being the thing it is, I think so many people just thought it was tacky. And I mean, there's probably people that still do, but I think you really see it with this year's team that's something that they take very seriously, and it's something that means a lot in the program, and it's going to have to mean a lot now. And I think what's most important is, you go on social media after Mike Penix goes down, and I mean, I'm not going to downplay the significance of that injury. That's a very important injury, and that's Indiana's best player is Michael Penix. He goes down. You go on social media, and you see, everyone's doubtful. They're saying Indiana's the most unlucky program ever, and they're always having to deal with stuff like this, even in the rare good seasons like this year. I don't think that's the conversation in the locker room. I think they have a lot of confidence in Jack Tuttle. I think that's why they went out and got someone like Jack Tuttle to transfer to Indiana is for opportunities like this. I think they're very confident in his abilities. I mean, all week, on the Zoom press conferences when we're talking to coaches and players, they're not just saying that Jack Tuttle is good enough. They're saying that Jack Tuttle is really good, and we're going to get a chance to see that. And I think the fact that Jack Tuttle is the backup quarterback, that's kind of the perception that always is around the backup quarterback. I mean, he was the third string last year. I just don't think we've seen a lot from him at the Division I level to really have any kind of gauge. And then if you want to go back to his high school game, well, okay, that's at the time when they got him to transfer, that's the most decorated high school player that ever come through Indiana football history. So I think, like you said, the culture that's created is so important because you need a confident Jack Tuttle out there, regardless of how he's playing. If he's not confident, he's not going to go out there and have a good game. If Tom Allen, Nick Sheridan, teammates around him are giving him that boost of confidence and saying that not only do they think he's good enough, they're saying that he's good enough to help them continue doing exactly what they were doing with Mike Penix. I think that's where Indiana thrives. And I think that's where you're really going to see the LEO and the culture, what it really means. You're going to see it, these coming weeks with Jack Tuttle in the game.
You mentioned the college football playoff committee debate earlier. It's funny to have different national college football controversies, which happen every year, actually involving Indiana football. But another one, Ohio State now on the bridge of not being eligible to go to the Big Ten championship game. It is almost 24 hours now away from the Michigan State game. It's still on the schedule, though last week's game against Illinois was not canceled until Friday night. But their game also against Michigan could not be played potentially either. Michigan's game already with Maryland canceled this week. I guess, what's your take? I know the IndyStars put out some content on this kind of situation with Ohio State, and if they can't play one more game according to the rules, 5 games, they would be ineligible to go to the Big Ten championship game. Indiana has clinched that second spot. That would be the Hoosiers, who have already played 6 games, would be eligible. However, the ADs and Barry Alvarez have said this week they could think about changing the rules. Are they going to do that? Should they do it? How are you viewing that all?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's kind of, at least the past couple of weeks, been the story of the Big Ten is, it is kind of crazy to think of the idea of this Ohio State team, which I think is going to, if they play their games against Michigan State and Michigan, I think they're going to win out. And I think they're the best team in the Big Ten. There's no denying that. However, these are the rules that the Big Ten put in place going into this season. And we talked a little bit there at the start of the show about whether Indiana was being disrespected by the college football playoff. I think the most disrespectful thing this season is how Indiana is being treated by their colleagues in the Big Ten and what these athletic directors are having, the conversations that they're having these past couple of days. I mean, it just does. This would not be the case if the roles were switched between Indiana and Ohio State. I think even if Indiana was the undefeated team and Ohio State was the one-loss team, I don't think the Big Ten would make too much of a effort to try to get this going, and I don't think that they would change the rules. I don't think they're changing the rules because of Wisconsin on the other side. They were only playing 3 games. I don't think they should be able to get into that Big Ten championship game. I just don't understand if this is a rule you made at the start of the season, and I'm assuming you're confident in this rule and you really thought it out. Did you not think about the idea that maybe Ohio State would have COVID issues and run? I mean, there's a pandemic going on. You can't assume that Ohio State is immune to it. It's just, I just want to wish I could have been in the room at the start of the season versus in the room now and just be like, what was this? What are you guys even talking about at this point? Because it just doesn't make any sense to me. That's where I feel Indiana's being snubbed the most. And you can say what you want. If Indiana does end up playing in the Big Ten title game and they win, people are going to discredit the title. And I mean, that's a fair point. Like I said, I think Ohio State's the best team, and you can walk away from the season and say that Ohio State's the Big Ten champion because they're undefeated. They're the one that got selected. That's going to get selected for the playoff. That makes sense. I get that the argument there. I just don't think the athletic directors and the presidents that are having these conversations. I just think first of all, you're saying a lot about yourself that you're already backing out on the rules that you created. I mean, no one asked for this rule. You guys thought it was the best idea. Now you're backing out of it. Okay, that's one thing. The second is, it just shows that even in the Big Ten, if they don't want to care much about the brand that Indiana is, or lack of a brand that Indiana has been, that's one thing. But I don't think you can go around changing rules at this point of the season to do that. So we'll see what happens there. I don't think they're going to end up changing it. The reason I think, and I think a lot of people don't like the rule in the first place, with the lack of games being played, I could see the argument of why you wouldn't like the rule, just because it's one thing to maybe, like, I don't know, the word would be punish Ohio State for having a COVID outbreak, but they've also lost games because other schools are having COVID outbreaks, and it was the Big Ten that's not really allowing much room to reschedule these games. So the scheduling really screws over Ohio State maybe more than the issues that they've had within their own department. But at the same time, I mean, you can't assume that Ohio State, if they play only 5 games, you can't assume that they were going to go undefeated in an 8-game stretch. And I know they're the best team in the Big Ten, and I know it's particularly not that close between Ohio State and the next team. I mean, obviously Indiana played that game against them. I think Ohio State's easily the best team in the Big Ten, but anything can happen. I mean, you see Michigan State go out and knock off a Northwestern. Is Northwestern as good as Ohio State? No, but are they way better than Michigan State? Well, they should be. They shouldn't have lost that game. If Ohio State played a full 8-game, 9-game schedule, who's to say that they weren't going to drop a game to someone like, I don't know. I mean, we've seen them lose to teams like Purdue and Iowa in the past. It's college football. It's very unpredictable in certain stretches. Anything could have happened to Ohio State, in those games that maybe even propels Indiana to still be able to get the Big Ten title. I think that's probably why the rule was put into place. And I think that's why you can't back away from it now, is because you can't assume what would happen if Ohio State had played the other games.
That's a great point. Wanted to touch back one more time on Saturday's game. We mentioned some of the important factors. What do you see as the number one key in the game to who comes up on top? I think many of the pundits are expecting it to be very close.
Yeah, no, I expect a close game as well. And to be honest, this might be one of the games this season where we see how Indiana could fare in a low-scoring game. I mean, I think we'll get into the 20s, but I'll be interested to see if maybe the team that wins, similar to that Northwestern game, only needs to score 17 points or so. So yeah, I think it'll definitely be a close game. I think the number one thing is turnovers. Both sides, both teams. I think the team that wins the turnover battle is the team that's going to win this game, because these are two offenses at this point with Tuttle stepping in now. You're going to want to be in good field position. The team that gets the most takeaways is probably going to have the best field position. Going to make it a lot easier on themselves to score on the offensive end. With offenses that have question marks around them. Whoever wins the turnover battle, I'd be stunned if they lost the game because of the way these teams work, the way these defenses work. That's going to be the number one thing.
All right, give us a prediction. Who wins tomorrow in Madison?
I think Indiana wins. I just think they're the better team right now. I don't know what Jack Tuttle is going to show up tomorrow. We're going to find out, but I think that Indiana's defense is just too good right now. Going up against a Wisconsin offense that I think that they can really slow down. I think Indiana wins. I'll give a score prediction. I'll say Indiana wins 24-17, something in that range.
All right. Well, before I let you go, I know you also cover IU men's and women's basketball. Busy week for both teams. IU men played 3 games at the Maui Invitational, 1-2, one ugly loss. What were your thoughts on really their first test against quality competition?
Yeah, I think they passed the test. I mean, if you were to say Indiana was going to go into Maui and win 2 to 3 games, I think most people would have been thrilled. I think it's just scary maybe for Indiana fans to see that Texas performance because it's a very dark reminder of the lows that this program has shown under Archie Miller. My colleague Zach Osterman, who covers Indiana athletics with me at the IndyStar. He wrote after the Texas game that Indiana can't afford another winner of hot and cold offense. And I think that he's absolutely right. Indiana cannot have another season where they had that Florida State game last year where it looks like Indiana's a top 5 team in the nation, and you come out after that and you score in the 40s and the 50s. Indiana can't have that. You can't be hot and cold at this point of the Archie Miller era. Especially with the recruits that he's talking about bringing in the shooting he's talking about bringing in. You can't have that. So the Texas performance is definitely something that's going to be talked a lot about and probably should be talked about the most coming out of Maui. But at this point in the season, being 3-1, you've got tough games with Florida State, Butler, and obviously what the Big Ten presents in itself. It's going to be interesting, and I think we're going to see the true Indiana team this season, maybe more than ever before, because you can't rely on Assembly Hall being rocking and giving you a bit of advantage in Big Ten play. So we'll see. But at this point in the season, if you're 3-1 going into this Florida State game, I think you can be happy with that. And I think overall you can be happy with the Maui performance, as long as that Texas game is a fluke and not the consistent trend that we see out of Indiana in terms of being inconsistent. And then in terms of the women's side, I'll touch on that because you mentioned them there. I covered them last night, Thursday night, when they played Samford. 71-26, I think, was the final score. I mean, this is a really, really good team, and it's so intriguing to see. And this is what I wrote about after the game. I mean, we're talking to Terry Moore and Allie Pepper, the two faces of the program right now, and they're just talking about how poorly they played and how much better they want to be on offense and how their transition offense struggled. And I'm like, I mean, they just beat a team by 45 points and held them to 26 points. I mean, this is a really, really good team if that's the expectation they have for themselves. I'm really excited to watch them play against Kentucky. I just think that's going to be a great game, and I'm happy that Indiana is going to be able to play on the national stage. I think the game's on ESPNU, so a good opportunity for fans to get a look at where the program's gone. But they're a national contender. I think South Carolina lost yesterday to North Carolina.
Yeah,
State.
they did.
It was their first loss, I think, since they lost to Indiana. So, I mean, that speaks a lot for what Indiana has been able to do the past couple seasons. So it's a really intriguing team, and I would really encourage fans that maybe don't invest as much time in the women's program to really start checking out this team. And they're really fun to watch. Allie Pepper is a pleasure to watch on the basketball court. She's so good on both ends. I'm very intrigued to see where this team goes this season.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And I mean, to your point, too, fans might be listening and not know Samford, who only scored 26 points. They won the SoCon last year and would have gone to the NCAA tournament. So this isn't a team like Indiana played the week before in Eastern Kentucky, who's, very young and really near the bottom of the D1 level, but was a good team, and they still dismantled them. So, I mean, they are favorites to win the Big Ten, and they look like they are too. Right.
Yeah, early on, I mean, they're passing the eye test. Stanford, yeah, I guess they're a pretty good team. I mean, their top player in battle, she put up pretty good performances against teams like Alabama and Auburn. I mean, they only lost to Auburn by 2 points coming into that game, an SEC opponent. And, Indiana's holding her to 10, 12 points, whatever she had, and really not letting anyone else get going. I mean, she had almost half of their points, I guess, at that point with what Indiana did. I mean, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how far this team can go this year.
Yeah, big game against Kentucky. Mentioned it. ESPNU, of course, Indiana football on Saturday, and Stefan did a great job previewing that. Really appreciate you coming on and helping us preview a big weekend in IU athletics.
Thanks. This is my first time coming on without Austin Render, so I'm happy that I could switch it up a little bit.
It's been big shoes to fill without Austin. I hope I'm doing a semi-adequate job.
Don't get his head any bigger. He doesn't need that.
It's the only reason I'm here, so
Oh no, all jokes. He's great. But no, thank you for having me on. I always enjoy coming on and talking all things IU athletics with you guys.
I appreciate that, Stefan. That will do it today for this episode of Unpaid Interns. We will be back on Monday with another great guest. Until then, enjoy your weekend. Big weekend in IU athletics. Saturday, some football. Sunday, another top 20 matchup in women's basketball. Hoosiers will take on Kentucky and Lexington. Until then, we'll talk to you next time.